Árboles oscuros, anchos sombreros, gritas negras, calles negras, llenos de los remotos países de la tierra. Y vamos bebiendo amor, cristal y That was Love, Crystal and Stone, number 4, Arcueros, by Ashkan Behzadi. Ashkan is a composer born in 1983 in Iran, currently living in Canada. He's a graduate of McGill University in composition and music theory. Prior to this, he also earned a bachelor's degree in architecture from Tehran University. He has studied composition with Alireza Mashayekhi, Chris Paul Harmon, Brian Cherney, Philippe Leroux, Fred Lerdahl, George Lewis, and Georg Friedrich Haas. Ashkan's pieces have been performed by various ensembles internationally, including the Vedamento Ensemble, Neuver Band Ensemble, Wet Ink, Talea Ensemble, Ekmeles, Yarn, Wire, Names Ensemble, Le Nouvel Ensemble Moderne, Esprit Orchestra, and also featured on festivals such as Mixtur Festival in 2017, Mozarteum Dialogues Festival 2016, Creative Dialogue 8, Manifeste 2014 at IRCAM, and SIR MMT New Music Series, the New Wave Young Composers Festival. Ashkan has won numerous prizes, including the 2015 ACF Showcase Competition, the Prix de Composition at Fontainebleau in 2013, and SOCAN Foundation Awards in 2012 and 2013. He is currently pursuing his doctoral studies in composition at Columbia University, where he's also a lecturer. Ashkan, thank you very much for being here. The issue of genre identity or genre blurring and the dialectical relationship between modernist lyric, poetry, and contemporary music have formed the core of your aesthetic concerns. Could you define what you mean by genre identity or genre blurring?
Thank you for inviting me to your podcast. It is my pleasure to have a chat about some of my ideas, my concerns in composing. Well, when I think about composition, a lot of times I'm thinking about what is the boundaries between various genres and how I can create a sort of a clash between various genres. Especially poetry is it's such an important genre when I'm composing and I'm thinking about the composition process. I There are various ways that I approach to composition. One is to I usually need to think about myself of someone else. For example, I need to think about myself as a craftsman, for example, someone who is producing this object with his hands, and there is this process of engaging with material and so on. But in other times, I think about myself as a poet, and just thinking about the composition process as a process of writing a poetry, how that kind of create a form of critical reflection on the genre of the contemporary music, kind of thinking about what is the boundaries of the genre, what is the possibilities, what is left out in the contemporary music that we have today, and what can be retrieved, kind of reiterate what aspect of music has been kind of forgotten and pushed into kind of oblivion, and then you can think about them once again with a different approach, with bringing some form of expressivity to them. And I usually this happens when I think about another genre, especially it's poetry. A lot of times I think about myself as a poet, and I prepare my composition process accordingly. That means that, for example, I have some gestures that they are my words, and I play around with them. But at the times also, um, when I work with text, this issue comes back again. For example, in my uh, kind of one of my recent pieces, it's a sound cycle on Lorca, and I constantly I was thinking how I can think about some inner dynamics of Lorca poetry, especially its translation in Farsi. I don't know if you know Shamlu's translation of Lorca. Of course, like I think it was one of the most influential uh, uh, cult- cultural products, at least for me and some of my colleagues. I kind of grew up with the tape of Shamlu reciting the text, and I knew even from my childhood at some point I'm going to kind of respond to that. I had this dream that I'm going to compose music for Lorca's text. And constantly, while I was working on the project, I was thinking how I can incorporate some of the aspects of the text, either in the original Lorca text, but mostly how Shamlu approached the translation of Lorca, kind of keeping some of the inner dynamic of the text, some musical aspect of the text, but incorporating some words from kind of old Persian words or folkloric words, and kind of creating a pastiche of elements that you're familiar, and they have some reference for you as a in your own culture. So that's basically if I'm um, kind of successful to get close to what is the idea behind this idea of the genre boundary and thinking about that. That's in a way my approach, or kind of it's the core of my understanding of myself as a composer. And when I think about a new piece, this is usually something that comes back again and again in my composition process.
You use the term genre quite often. What do you mean by genre?
Well, I mean, by genre, it's what is defined as the boundaries of the realm that you're expressing. In this case, um, contemporary music, it has some certain features, some certain specifics. Of course, there are some transformation when, for example, a composer think about theater, for example, it incorporating some elements of theater, then the genre start to blur and kind of start to mantle into something else. But for me, there is a sort of like um, a different manner. It's not about where the genre disappears into something else, but it's how another genre could actually come back inside the boundaries of very defined, for example, let's say mainstream component of a genre. That means that, for example, I compose fairly mostly in acoustic music, in the concert acoustic music. That's very much in inside the boundary of a genre that is, let's say, it's contemporary music. If I can define what is the genre of the contemporary music, it's very difficult, of course, and hesitant to do that because it's constantly it's changing, it's transforming, it's becoming something else. It's developing. It's like an organic organism or sort of like a living thing that is transforming. But I'm very much concerned in my own compositional processes, very kind of defined features of genre of the music, and that is very limited uh, kind of boundary, and that is the concert, uh, classical concert, contemporary music, and that's I believe it has some certain features that you can't. really defined, but in a sense you can kind of navigate yourself inside this kind of a space, in a sense.
If I remember correctly, you mentioned that you try to create what is left out of contemporary music, what's forgotten in contemporary music. What do you think is left out in contemporary music?
For example, I think about melody. For example, melody is something that uh, it's of course it's not that I'm the only person that I'm thinking about melody, but melody is something that it's to some degree it's left out, and approaching melody in very um, kind of almost traditional way, let's say that it's the career of this expression. Of course, it's not always that straightforward in my music either. It's most of the time it's quite elusive. It's kind of hidden along other layers, and it's wrapped around with some other layers that they are creating. Mostly these heterophonic textures, and it's kind of wrapped around. But at the end, for example, in my there's this piece. It's called Flip, and I composed this melody, this melodic line. That it was the core of the whole piece, and kind of it uh, provide the whole material for the harmonic and formal aspect, and everything else was coming from this melody. And later on, this melody continues to have a life in my, for example, string quartet, or even my piece, the Lorca song cycle. So it's something that and I think like other composers that I appreciate their music. For example, Puppet's composer that I find this similarity that he has. He thinks about melody, and melody is such an important aspect of his musical construction. And that's, for example, one aspect. The other aspect is various rhythmic structures that are not necessarily in the foreground, but it's kind of like defining some very fundamental structural construction. So these are the things that I mean, for me, it's I constantly try to revive and think about them and so on, and kind of maybe as a sort of as something that is in really in deep layers of the music, but if you kind of dig in, and maybe you can find them, and you can find these moments that it has some career of something maybe melancholic, or not necessarily melancholic, but something that it belongs to past, but it comes back in a way um, not nostalgic. It's something that is uh, uh, that it's almost as if it's bringing a memory from your childhood or something. Childhood is something that I constantly think about, and kind of um, and writing for children is something that I constantly think about. And not specifically composing for children, but composing as if I'm composing for children. And that is, for example, in Lorca piece, I was constantly thinking that my piece is heard by children, not by, I don't know, adults. And there are melodies, and that is space that it is kind of the space that I probably imagine would be my childhood. I don't know, thinking about music or something like that. And then I think melody becomes something very important, something that is deep in the layer, and suddenly it brings back this moment, uh, this moment of kind of a relapse into past, but uh, bringing it sort of like a imagination, space of expressivity. however it is, however the space is. It's not necessarily melancholia or nostalgia that I'm looking for. It's this, just this moment, this space of going back into something that is left out and you've forgotten.
So you mentioned that you don't try to compose for children. So in the sense that you do not imagine your audience to be children, but you kind of put
It's
yourself in the head of a child when composing. Did I understand that correctly?
in a way, I mean, I haven't composed, I haven't dared to compose for children. I found it like very difficult. I tried to compose for children, and at some point I'm going to do that, I'm sure. But maybe when I'm very mature composer. But I'm constantly striving for that, in a sense. Either imagining that I'm composing for children in a sense that there are some imaginary children listening to my music, and or I'm incorporating a sort of this imagination that I think is childish or childhood imagination, let's say. That is that how you very weirdly experience the world when you're a child, and all these weird spaces, like disproportionate spaces, and kind of all this weird fascination with objects and I don't know sounds and something like that. Um,
So the curiosity in children is something you try to capture in your work.
I'm striving, exactly. I'm striving. I'm hoping to revive that, uh, either both in myself in approaching composition more and more, and kind of getting deeper into that space of curiosity, hopefully, and but also like I'm hoping that my piece can create that space of curiosity and space of imagination, childish almost imagination.
Now I'm curious to know, do you write poetry yourself?
No. No, I never tried actually. I no, it's I draw sometimes, but very badly, very poorly. But I don't write poetry. But I think there was always it's a very psychological, I guess, kind of personal. My brother was writing poetry when he was I don't know, starting when he was 5 years old or something. And I always feel that my composition it was kind of a competition, and with my brother, and always poetry is something that I'm incorporating because it's also the competition that I was trying to do with poetry in a sense. But it's also its sound is abstract. There was no access by my parents, I suppose, and my brother, and I don't know, by others to compare us or judge me in a sense. But I think it's an interesting dynamic why poetry, and I think it's there's this psychological element there, I suppose.
If I recall correctly, you have a piece called Combragé, and this piece has a dance. And can you explain how you developed the piece with the dance? Where did the idea for the dance come from?
Hmm. It was actually I applied for Manifest Festival. That was in 2000 and I think in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. But it was for there was a section that I applied for, and that was in vivo dance. It's called. I always wanted to compose for dance, and it was. The choreographer Louis Touzé, I found his work quite fascinating, and he had this kind of improvisatory approach to choreography. He had a group of dancers that they collaborated very closely with each other. They when it came to the we had this meeting. We shared some ideas. I showed some pieces. He talked about my music. I talked about his choreography, and then I start composing the piece. It was for four voices, and the ensemble that was going to perform Exodi. They are this very fascinating vocal ensemble. I think they are based in London, if I'm not mistaken. They recorded some. I composed a piece. They recorded kind of the rehearsals. They put this model, this mock up together, and then Louis Tuzet listened to the piece, and we got together in Manifest Festival, and we started working on the piece together. Basically, that was we had this immense number of hours of rehearsals. I mean, it was incredible. Um, I, for I can't remember now, but it was for almost 2 or 3 weeks every day for 3 4 hours or something like that. It was I think five. Yeah, I think five dancers, and we had the recording, and then we very much shared our ideas. I mean, gradually the dance came together during the process of rehearsals. It was not that Louis had his piece ready and I had the piece ready almost. I made some changes, slight changes during the course of the process, but basically I help to find like where are the moments in the piece. Something that I found quite fascinating is that well, fascinating, it's not quite the word. Unfortunate was that we had this huge gap with understanding each other's genres. I mean, Louis Tuzet had very limited kind of understanding of where are the important or where are the moments of change or transformation in music, and I the other way around. I basically didn't have any idea about the subtlety, about the gestures and the form and so on. So a lot of time we actually spent together and drinking, talking, and in the rehearsals about what we can. I mean, what is the idea behind the piece and what he can do with the choreography. And then he did, as I said, he didn't have a plan. He had like section by section. He had this idea, and he mentioned this idea to the dancers, and dancers responded to that kind of in a form of improvisation or something like that. But it was quite, it had form eventually. But how it was developed was quite based on improvisation. It was quite a fascinating process, and I didn't have a chance to work with dancers after that. It's the only occasion that I actually worked with a choreographer. But it was it was quite kind of eye opening because you see how how you can, for example, while composing the piece, I was thinking about gestures and so on, and then when we get there, and I noticed that how my ideas are quite exhausted in a sense about how the relationship between dance and music. And then he mentioned, "Oh, that's no, that's too exhausted. That's too old style in a sense." And then we had to find like some sort of like a counterpoint and some sort of like a relate other form of relationship between the music and dance. And it really it transformed, of course, my also way of composing. After that, I started thinking about gestures, for example, a lot in my composition. My string quartets, I think about gestures and space and so on. Or there's another piece that I composed for video and ensemble, and in that piece, very much choreography the video in a sense along the composition. So yeah, that was very fascinating experience. I wish I could continue. I'm sure at some point I might have the chance again to work with the choreographer. But yeah.
Now I'm curious to know. You mentioned Lorca. You mentioned your favorite composers. Uh, what other art mediums are you interested in? What artists do you like?
Um, well, I'm I have some interest still in architecture and the space. I mean, I had this life as an architect, at least for a very short period of time. Space is such an important uh, uh, kind of entity that I think about while I'm composing a piece. The other, I mean, I like others. I watch movies, painting.
Who are amongst your favorite directors, for example?
Haneke is always is one of my like absolutely favorites. Coen Brothers, some of their movies I can think of. Um, who else? Oh, Lynch, of course. It's quite. It's actually uh, it's someone that I think it's almost like a role model in a sense that I hope I can have that way of delving into material itself, into genre itself, and have that deep understanding of the genre at some point. Yeah, I mean, but mostly I mean, as a matter of force, I think about poetry and space architecture. It's quite important, and then maybe to some degree gestures and dance to some degree. To some degree.
As a composer, how do you find your next gig? How do you try to survive?
Well, I'm not so worried about that. Also, I mean, my friends they are worried about, I don't know, finding opportunities and so on. I'm more and more. I'm thinking about projects that I want to do in long term. I'm more and more fascinated with. Larger scale projects. Like for example, it's very much possible that I can continue the second half of the Lorca project. I have this idea of composing this very large 4 hours of Lorcalandia. What I want to think about that. Hopefully, I can then incorporate dance and maybe some visual element, choreography, and stage design, and maybe I don't know, screens and animation, painting, and so on. Kind of this, you go walk into this space, almost like Alice in Wonderland, but it's Lorcalandia, it's land of Lorca, and so on. That's one project that I'm sure that I'm going to do in my life. The other project is this continuation of this hopefully series of love poems, Persian modernist love poems, and soprano and violin. It's something that I'm sure at some point I'm going to compose that. A kind of like as a model, I have Kafka fragments by Kurtak, and I'm thinking about that. But larger pieces, like series of pieces, but they are kind of longer pieces. Uh, so these are like another project that I have in mind, and I know at some point I'm hoping that I can compose that. That might be a little bit difficult. This piece for violin and 4 or 6 percussionists or something like that. Sort of like a violin concerto for violin and percussion ensemble. Um, more and more, I'm more interested in kind of working on these projects rather than to just jump from one project to another. Of course, I have this support that is financial support that I teach and I don't need to be worried about earning my life as a sort of freelance composer. And more, I'm hoping that I can develop friendship and kind of connection with very few ensembles that I have. I Something that I notice more and more is that if I really need to have this connection, this intimate uh, friendship with an ensemble, so I can compose with them or I can work with them in a sense. If I don't feel that, then I can't. I or my the piece is usually it's very bad piece. So more and more, I'm kind of limiting the ensembles that I work with them, and I hope that I can continue the relationship, and then I can compose just for them. Uh, and I think that's a very healthy way of approaching. Eventually, if I can just compose some of these projects that I have in mind, it's enough for me. I can die happy. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not. I lost this anxiety at some point that I need. I don't have enough gigs and I don't have any piece composing right now. I focus on composing for myself. This I worked on this piano electronic piece this year. Although I had to compose actually some projects, but this piece I started after a while, probably because of the COVID. I had this space and I started composing this very large scale piano electronic piece only for myself. And it's quite enjoyable actually. It's healthy, I believe. Yeah, and but of course, if it happens, then I have projects, there are ensembles, and I feel connected, then I compose with them. Yeah,
Ashkan, thank you.
thank you.